everybody. Boy, it feels so nice to walk out here with just a file folder and not a big briefing book. This is going to be our last briefing of the year. So I wanted to take the opportunity. I know, really looking forward to that. And I brought with you a couple of fantastic guests as a part of our way to bring more information to you from our experts. Nobody knows these issues better than our colleagues here at the State Department. Before we get to them, I just wanted to say thank you so much for a terrific 2017. I am truly honored to be working with you each and every day. Your professionalism, your dedication to the facts is really something that has been so impressive, and I just wanted to thank you all for the job that you do. We're looking forward to seeing, I hope many of you later tonight at the Secretary's reception, his holiday reception for the press, and also some think tanks will be joining us for the first time this year. And with that, I'd also like to say thanks to all of our colleagues across the world for working so hard in 2017. We've had so many acting people who've stepped up and done some very difficult jobs, and just wanted to thank them and their families for supporting them in the work. So today we're here to bring you two senior State Department officials to brief you on two important foreign policy issues. First, I'd like to introduce you to our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Arabian Gulf Affairs, Tim Lenderking. Many of you perhaps know Tim. He's here to speak about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. You may have seen a short while ago that the White House put out an announcement on Yemen and the changes, we believe, to the humanitarian situation there. In addition, USAID put out a statement as well. Since 2015, the U.S. government, through USAID and state, has provided more than $1.3 billion in humanitarian assistance to the Yemeni people. Following Tim's briefing and some questions and answers, Brett McGurk, the Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter ISIS, will provide an update for you on the de-ISIS campaign, and he will take your questions as well. And then we'll hightail that out of here and see you guys later this evening. Okay, Das Lenderking, you want to take over? Sure. Okay, and I'll call on you all just to help facilitate.
Well, thank you very much, Heather, and good afternoon, everybody. Very glad to be here. Happy holidays to all of you. I really want to emphasize the importance that we're placing on the Yemen conflict right now. I think you've seen, as Heather mentioned, the statement that was just released by the White House. This caps a very, very, very busy couple of weeks of statements and very aggressive diplomacy on the part of the President, the Secretary of State, the Deputy Secretary. A lot of very positive interaction between us and members of Congress who are keenly interested in this conflict as well. As Heather stated, no one's put more attention and more funding into the Yemen conflict than the United States. She mentioned the figure of $1.3 billion. It's a very significant amount, but I think also we're dealing with very significant problems inside Yemen. There's both the cholera and the food insecurity situation. But we're very pleased that Saudi Arabia and members of the coalition announced 2 days ago the opening of Hodeidah Port. That is for all types of assistance. That's humanitarian assistance, it's commercial assistance. They have also agreed to moving 4 U.S.-funded cranes, which have been in storage in Dubai for some time, which will help offload ships that are now about to berth and move toward Hodeidah Port. We think this is going to help alleviate some of the humanitarian concerns. This brings, I'd say, to culmination, as I said, what I think is very aggressive diplomacy by the United States on this front. You saw the President's message a week ago, which he called on the Saudi leadership and said we were working with the Saudis very closely to open up humanitarian corridors. This has been very helpful to us. The Secretary of State has been very, very, very much engaged. We've been talking to NGOs as well. The Deputy Secretary chaired a meeting last Friday with key international and American NGOs to hear their concerns and to move their concerns to the forefront. So this has been an evolving situation, but something that we really put a lot of muscle into in the last few weeks. We've also worked with the Saudis and the Emiratis through a mechanism which we call the Quad. This brings the 3 of those countries with us, 2 of those countries with us, and with the Brits together. We've had 2 meetings recently, one in London, one in Abu Dhabi, at the ministerial level, in which the humanitarian component has featured very centrally in the discussions that we've had with these core countries, and we want to keep that mechanism going as a way of helping with the political process. Not only are we working on the humanitarian side, we're also moving toward a political process, we hope, as there is no military solution to this conflict. So the more bombs that are dropping, the more Houthi aggression, the more attacks against Riyadh and other population centers in Riyadh, which we cannot countenance, the more the conflict is going to drag on. So we're pushing everybody to move into a political process as quickly as we can. One very concerning element to all this, and very consistent throughout the last couple of years of the conflict, has been Iran's support for the Houthis. We believe that there is room for the Houthis in a political settlement. We welcome that, but not when the Houthis continue to rocket a key ally like Saudi Arabia on a regular basis, and also not when the Houthis are menacing the border of Saudi Arabia, which is something that goes on very consistently. So with that, I would be very happy to take any comments or questions.
So, hi, Tim. This is Yemen related, although it may not be exactly the topic you want to talk about. As you are well aware, the UN General Assembly just voted on this resolution condemning the decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Yemen actually introduced that and then voted for it. Given Ambassador Haley's comments, how much of the assistance that you guys have provided to them is going to be cut now because of their decision not just to vote in favor, but to actually introduce the resolution?
Well, I'd go with what Nikki Haley said, and the president indeed, is that we're paying very close attention to who votes where on this. No decisions have been made. I think this is it's a breaking development, but we are looking very closely at who voted where, and I think there'll be very close scrutiny and decisions made on that basis. I can't speak specifically to Yemen, though.
Okay, but you're saying so humanitarian assistance, including for a country that's in absolute catastrophic crisis right now, is possibly on the table here because of this vote in the UN today?
Well, I don't know that for sure. I just know what Nikki Haley said to address that situation, and what the White House has said, that we take the vote very seriously. We have to measure that against the fact that there is a humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen. There are many reasons why that has come to be so. It's in the United States' interest to see this conflict in Yemen brought to a close. Al-Qaeda benefits, Daesh benefits, Iran benefits, not good for the United States. So you got to put all these things together in terms of how we move forward.
So it was an empty threat?
I wouldn't call it an empty threat at all. I think it's a very fulsome threat, and I think it's there's nothing I can do to expand on what Nikki Haley and the White House
All right.
said.
And last one, very briefly. You mentioned talking to diplomacy with the Saudis and the Emiratis. Well, both the Saudis and the Emiratis voted in favor of this resolution as well. How do you see? Is that going to affect your diplomacy with them, or again, was the bluster, or what was the talk just bluster up in New York?
Well, first of all, I don't think the talk was just bluster. I can't, again, speak to the specifics of how we intend to move on these votes. This all just happened. We have, very strong partnerships going on with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. It's not just the Yemen conflict, it's across the board. These are key allies for us in the Middle East. You're going to hear from Brett McGurk in a few minutes talking about the counter-ISIL crisis conflict. Both of these countries are key partners in that conflict. So I think you have to look at the broad range of things that we do with these countries. They are very important partners in the fight against terrorism.
Hi, Tim. Can you talk about the Saudis say this is a 30-day opening of Hudaydah? Do you have any indication that they would be willing to extend it beyond 30 days? And then also, when you talk about moving toward a political process, do you have any sense right now of what that process might look like?
On the 30 days, I think we'll have a conversation with the Saudis about the duration of that. I don't want to read into their thinking on this, because I think they're going to reveal more about their humanitarian plans in coming days. So I don't want to prejudge any of that. It's taken a lot to get us to this point. As I said in my opening remarks, a great deal of U.S. muscle, I think, being applied here. And so I think we're all going to evaluate as this process goes on. I mean, the first thing we want to see is ships actually moving into Hodeidah port, offloading, providing fuel, water supplies for the Yemeni people, filling the hospitals with fuel so that medical supplies can be dispensed, the kinds of things that the NGOs talked to us about a week ago and who have made, and issues that they've made clear. So I think we'll all be evaluating. The four U.S. cranes will be on their way very shortly to Hodeidah. We want to see them installed. We want to see them playing a central role here in offloading ships. I think all that we look at and we evaluate over time. I think the Saudis want to work with us on this, and getting to the, working with them to get to this point has been a very significant development. As to the peace process, or political process, there's a great deal of turmoil in Yemen right now. The killing of Ali Abdullah Saleh. He was not a strong partner of us, as you know, in the last couple of years, and was in a sort of an unholy alliance with the Houthis, which was very problematic for us and the Saudis and our coalition partners. He's moved from the scene. I think what we want to call for in Yemen is unity among the various parties. It's not a time for further disintegration, further turmoil inside Yemen. That is only going to complicate the kinds of priorities that I've been talking about in terms of getting a political process going and working on the humanitarian side. The reprisals that we've seen against the GPC, we have condemned those. We've called on the Houthis to cease carrying out reprisals against members of Saleh's party, against his family. We're looking to push everybody to the extent we can, and I realize that there's own rhythm inside Yemen for these things. It's not necessarily something for outsiders to dictate. There's a rhythm here for Yemeni parties to come together, and this is the time to do it.
Next question, please. Dave from AFP.
Hi, thank you very much. Obviously, the United States has given strong support to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in their battle against Iranian influence and against the aggression of the Houthis. Is there a risk, though, that they've misinterpreted this as a green light for destabilizing activity? The blockade of Yemen obviously has created a humanitarian problem there, and I've had to call them out in recent weeks, as you've noted. Does the United States bear some responsibility for the aggression of recent Saudi actions in Yemen, and did they misinterpret your support?
Well, we've been very, I think the benefit of having a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia is that we're very clear and very frank in our private conversations. You've seen a lot of the public messaging on this, but privately we've been very, very direct. We've had numerous venues and numerous opportunities to talk to the Saudi leadership, whether it's the president with King Salman yesterday or the secretary with his counterparts. As I've said, there's very active dialogue going on. I think what we have in Yemen is a situation that, given turmoil and chaos, the Iranians have been able to exploit this situation to their own benefit. What that has meant is strong developments inside the country that are very fundamentally against U.S. interests. So I wouldn't say that Saudis have misinterpreted anything. I think we've been, and I think if you look at the openings on the humanitarian front, that is a situation of message received, and I think we should be glad about that. But there's a lot more work to be done. And by the way, when the Saudis closed the border after the November 4th missile attack, we were not in favor of that. We did not think that was an appropriate response. We've encouraged the Saudis, as difficult as it may seem, you've got to separate the humanitarian piece from the military piece. We understand that your country is being aggressed and menaced on a regular basis by the Houthis. That the response to that cannot be shutting off of humanitarian outlets and access that are essential for the Yemeni people. So that's been a core part of our message as well.
Arshad from Reuters.
One question about the White House statement this afternoon. After condemning in the strongest terms the latest missile attack, the next sentence says the Iranians have also enabled, and then you refer back to the attack on the airport. Is it the U.S. government's judgment that the Iranians enabled the most recent missile attack? Do you have any granular information on what kind of a missile, whether it was Iranian-provided missile, what exactly the Iranians did to enable this?
I'm not going to speak to the real specifics of that because I think we're still working through, this is a very recent attack. We're working through some of the information as we're collecting it, which the Saudis are helping us to do. I encourage you all to go and visit the display that Nikki Haley highlighted last week, the display of Iranian missile parts. These are parts from actual, missile impacts inside the kingdom or the Arab Emirates. They've been collected. They are on display there. I think it's one very important data piece in understanding what the Saudis and the coalition face, which is this Iranian assistance to the Houthis. I think the Houthis have been able to do in a very short amount of time what other organizations like Hezbollah took a long time to develop. And so what we've seen is this kind of Iranian support for Houthi ballistic missile capability, which is extremely worrisome. When a missile lands 4 kilometers from Riyadh International Airport, King Khalid International Airport, our diplomats use that airport, the UN uses that airport, foreign embassies use that airport, the Saudi leadership uses that airport. It's an unconscionable display of aggression, I think, when we are faced with that kind of threat. So it's not going to be easy to blunt that, but we're trying to enable the Saudis to be able to blunt that kind of threat on their own as we work on the margins with resolving some of the issues in the Yemen conflict that give Iran the ability and a seat at the table, if you will, that we wish to deny them.
But did the Iranians enable the December the 19th missile attack? Do you believe that they did?
Oh, yes. Yes, I certainly do. And I think if you go out and visit the display, you will see the irrefutable evidence of Iranian parts. There's a very key relationship between the Iranians and the Houthis. I don't want to overstate it. I don't want to suggest that the Houthis operate entirely at the behest of the Iranians, but it's an important relationship and one that the Iranians are able to exploit.
Next question. Arshad, if I may just point of clarification. You said this most recent one?
Yeah, the December the 19th one. That's what I was asking
I
about.
just want to make sure you got
I'm
that.
sorry, I meant the previous.
Okay, so you don't have a definitive view
No,
on the
I don't have
19th?
a definitive answer on the most recent one.
Got it.
Let's talk
Okay,
about
thank
the one
you.
before that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Connor from ABC.
Thank you for doing this. You obviously welcomed the announcement this week about the ending the blockade, but given the Saudis' escalation in their bombing campaign since that November missile attack, the fact that they implemented this blockade in the first place over the past, period of weeks, are they responsible at all for the humanitarian crisis on the ground in Yemen?
Well, I think you can point to a lot of blame to go around. There's no question that when infrastructure has gotten damaged in the air campaign, that's been a contributing factor. Not everything that explodes inside Yemen is attributable to the coalition. Sometimes it's assumed that that is the case. The Houthis attack civilians. The Houthis have destroyed civilian infrastructure. So that's, I think just part of the reality of what we're dealing with. Yemen before the conflict was not a happy place in the sense that it was not a developed country. There was already economic decline that was beginning to set in. But this, the last couple of years of conflict has certainly exacerbated those trends. We want to move very quickly to reverse those. As we're supporting the Yemen Central Bank as an institution, again, trying to work back toward a political solution a political process that would lead to a cessation of hostilities. We continue to back the efforts of the UN Special Envoy as well, as he maintains that role and continues his engagement with the parties.
Final question. We've got to get moving on. 2 minutes to go up to the Hill for a briefing. Connor, you good with that?
Just in part, so you would say in part at least that they're responsible for some of the deaths, some of the famine.
I think, there's blame or responsibility, I should say, across the board, I think.
Last question, just piggybacking off of the Haley conversation earlier, you called it a fulsome threat from Haley and the White House. So can you kind of expand on the conversations that will be had with the State Department and the UN and the White House in regard to following up on such threat, if conversations have been had already or if they're planned for the future?
I really cannot, because I just don't know the details. And again, this is something that just happened. I would go with what we've already said, on the record.
I think it's premature to get into any of that right now. Des Lenderking, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Happy holidays to you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
And then we have Brett McGurk, our special presidential envoy. Brett has some comments, and then he'll take a few questions from you.
Okay.
No maps today?
There will be one. Yeah. So thanks, everyone. I guess it's the last briefing of the year, so I thought we would kind of sum up the overall campaign. I think I got
Laser
one.
thing?
Yeah.
Oh, you have one. Okay.
Yeah. Sum up the campaign against ISIS over the past year, and where we are, and kind of a little bit on where we're going. We'll have more to say about that in the coming year, particularly over the coming weeks. I think it's just worth recalling. ISIS used to be controlling basically a state, 100,000 square kilometers, the size of the UK, planning and plotting and carrying out major terrorist attacks against our partner homelands, inspiring attacks here in the homeland. Responsible for the violent murder of American citizens, James Foley, Steve Sutloff, Peter Abdul Rahman, as well as the death of Kayla Mueller. Committing acts of genocide against Yazidis as they swept into Iraq and other minority groups, displacing Christians from their ancient homelands, and destroying our common heritage. We've really never seen anything like it. 40,000 foreign fighters from 110 countries around the world pouring into this so-called phony caliphate. So in January, when the new administration came in, when President Trump came in and Secretary Tillerson came in, we faced real critical challenges in terms of major plotting attacks against us and against our partner homelands coming from Syria and Iraq. And they were aspiring to kind of major 9/11 type attacks. That's what they really aspired to do. And so long as they had these safe havens and sanctuaries, particularly cities, a city like Raqqa, and at the time they still controlled half of Mosul, it was really hard to root them out. So really 3 key decisions were made right off the bat as soon as President Trump came into office. Number 1, he issued a directive within, I think, his 3rd day for all of us to really look to accelerate the overall defeat of ISIS. He delegated authorities immediately to Secretary Mattis and our commanders in the field. When Secretary Tillerson came in, he made clear to all of us that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, and our priority is the defeat of ISIS. One of his first major events here at the State Department was gathering almost 70 countries here at the State Department from our global coalition. It's now one of the largest coalitions of its kind ever assembled in history, with 74 members. And we all gathered here in March really to map out the next phase of the campaign over what is now the last 10 months, particularly Mosul and Raqqa. The Secretary also made the decision very early on to deploy a small team of experts from the State Department into Syria to work with our military partners as we got into the campaign in Tabqa and Raqqa, which I'll talk about. We established task forces here at the State Department and the Department of Defense to coordinate the interagency in a way that had not been coordinated before, and we developed an overall global campaign plan called the Defeat ISIS Strategic Plan, which has been approved by the President. So, prioritize the defeat of ISIS. If everything's important, nothing's important, and accelerate the campaign, and I'll bring you into the campaign to describe kind of how this has gone over the last year. Second, when he looked at the situation in Syria, decided we have to set conditions for a political settlement in Syria by de-escalating the overall conflict. This is a conflict that killed 400,000 people, displaced 11 million people, and obviously the situation, we had to look at ways to bring it under control. We had tried things like national ceasefires, they hadn't worked, so we really took a new approach. Looked at different parts of the country, tried to establish de-escalation zones, ceasefire areas, and really pragmatic, pretty hard-nosed diplomacy with the Russians. And looked at Syria in terms of phases. Number 1, you have to defeat the physical caliphate of ISIS. So long as you have a caliphate in the middle of Syria, it's really hard to get a realistic, meaningful political process underway. And you had to overall de-escalate the overall conflict to move ahead on the political process based in Geneva under UN Security Council Resolution 2254. I'll talk a little bit about that. Finally, holding Assad accountable for his chemical weapons use and proliferation. I think the April 6th strike ordered by the president, we actually happened to be in some negotiations with the Russians while all this was going on, had a pretty dramatic effect, I think, on the overall situation, our ability to exert some leverage on the overall situation in Syria. So those three key decisions, I think, have made a difference and have helped to speed some things up. I think I have a map. Okay. So let me just kind of brief on this map. It's the current situation, and just to situate you, if you can all see it, everything in green on this map everything in light green and dark green has been taken away from ISIS. It's about 98% of their former caliphate, and significantly 50% of all the territory that ISIS has lost, they have lost in the last 11 months, since January. So 50% of all the territorial losses against ISIS have come in the last 11 months over the course of 2017. 7.7 million people used to be living under ISIS are no longer living under ISIS, and 5 million of those people were liberated over the course of this past year. So when we came into office, there was still about 5 million people under ISIS. They are no longer under ISIS. Returnees, we talked about this in the past, the pace picked up. In Iraq, we have returned 2.7 million Iraqis back to their homes. Again, that is a historically unprecedented rate of returns in a conflict like this. 1.4 million of those returnees in this past year. In Syria, for the first time, the Syria situation still remains totally unacceptable. All the violence and the loss of life is attributable to Bashar al-Assad and his regime. But in Syria, for this year, for the first time, we did see significant returns, about 715,000, according to UN data, actually returning to their homes, 50,000 from outside Syria. And I think the focus on de-escalation had a contribution to that. So based upon all that, I can kind of bring you into what we did over last year and how this really came together. So there's a number 1 on the map, which, I guess this doesn't work with the TV. There's a number 1 on the map at Topka, which I can point to right here. Topka, the Battle of Topka began on March 21st. What's significant about it is kind of how it began. And I happened to be in Syria right around this time. And the force we're working with, the Syrian Democratic Forces, identified an opportunity, but they had to launch almost immediately. They said, if we can launch within days, to hop over a body of water about 10 kilometers and catch ISIS by surprise. They thought that they could seize Topka, the Topka Dam, and the Topka Airport. So our commanders, having the delegated authority, wasted no time, put this operation together. It launched on March 21st, ended on May 11th. And I visited Topka shortly after the battle. It wasn't just the battle. It was the first time we also had State Department personnel working together to kind of help facilitate the humanitarian and stabilization aftermath of the conflict. So they worked to clear landmines, get humanitarian aid into the city. And the population before the war in Topka was 70,000. The population today, about 110,000 since ISIS has left. And without Topka, had Topka not been seized, Raqqa would not have been able to be taken because Topka really kind of helped close the noose on Raqqa. So that delegation of authorities made a specific, immediate difference in that very significant battle. Second was Raqqa. So shortly after the Topka battle concluded in May, we looked at, again, all the options for Raqqa. You've reported on this, many of you. We looked at every possible way to do Raqqa. A couple options were presented to the president. And really the option that he determined was the most viable option was the option to use our partner forces, Syrian Democratic Forces. And a couple of reasons for that. The other option would have required really tens of thousands of American troops on the ground, and that's a model that we do not want to return to. So the Battle of Raqqa began on June 6th, D-Day as it's known, but it began on June 6th, and it concluded about 5 months later. Very, very difficult street-by-street fighting. I was in Raqqa about 3 weeks ago, and you can see the aftermath of this battle. Our force that we work with, the Syrian Democratic Forces, about 400 were killed in the battle, about 700 wounded. No Americans were lost in this battle. We did lose one coalition special forces operator from one of our coalition partners. Displacement. In the Battle of Raqqa, in the province, about 264,000 people were displaced. And in the early phase of the battle, you can actually see the displacement, and we actually really had to catch up. But having our team of experts on the ground, we immediately flooded resources into Syria, and were able to manage the humanitarian displaced population from Raqqa fairly well. About 34,000 now have returned. One reason why it'll take a while to get people back into their homes of Raqqa is that ISIS has basically every single standing structure in Raqqa has an IED in it. We're finding that as our teams that we've trained about 125 Syrians now, together with experts, to really clear the streets of these areas that have been cleared. And it takes a lot of time. We're finding an IED in almost every freestanding structure. So ISIS, as they lose territory, kind of salt the earth to make sure that life cannot return. We do believe the outlying neighborhoods of Raqqa, which are fairly well intact, we will see significant returns. The center of the city, having seen it with my own eyes, is fairly well destroyed. I think it'll be a very long time before people are able to return there. We are in the business, as we've said before, of stabilizing these areas, clearing landmines, humanitarian, basic water, basic health, electricity. We are not engaged in nation-building exercises and long-term reconstruction. Let me point to number 3. This is right here. And this is where you can see the red on the map, and that is where ISIS still has some small safe havens. I point to it because there is still very significant fighting going on. And I just want to emphasize this point. This isn't over. The fact that we made a lot of progress this year, nobody who works on these problems would tell you that we're popping champagne corks or anything. This is not over. This is a long way to go. Even on the ground in Syria, there's probably some months of operations left in this area. Heavy fighting's ongoing, 31 airstrikes, coalition airstrikes in the last week alone. And we killed 3 very, very, very senior ISIS leaders right in that area in the last week. And we're capturing, actually, as we speak, a number of fighters trying to flee. Last week, a significant milestone, the Iraqi security forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces linked up at the border, just kind of tightening the noose on ISIS. And this area also has been critical in terms of deconflicting operations with the Russians, something we've talked about throughout the year. We've kind of drawn some lines on the map with the Russians about where their forces would be, where we would be. This is a professional military-to-military engagement focused on deconfliction. We're not coordinating operations, but making sure we don't have any accidents. That's extremely tense from time to time, but overall, that has gone quite well and accelerated the pace of operations. So the engagement with the Russians has actually, I think, contributed to the demise of ISIS, at least in the caliphate. I'm going to go down to just southeast Syria. I'll start moving a little faster, but right here is a garrison called Al-Tanf. We have a small U.S. military presence there. We're working with a local force. There is still ISIS in the area. There was an operation. We actually engaged with a column, our military personnel, with our partner force just last week in a very heavy engagement. But another reason why our presence is important there is there's an IDP camp right on the Jordanian border. About 40,000 people are there. And we want to get aid to that camp. We want to get aid to that camp from the Syrian side. And we're pushing, particularly through the Russians, to come up with a common plan to get aid to that camp. And we have called on the Russians to be cooperative in that effort. And we were pleased that earlier this week, the UN Security Council resolution renewed resolutions known as 2165 that authorizes cross-border assistance into Syria. That was quite an important development as we manage the humanitarian situation in Syria. So that's Tanf. We are present at Tanf, and we're going to be present at Tanf to make sure ISIS cannot return, and also to manage this difficult humanitarian situation. We will also remain present in the other areas of Syria to make sure that ISIS cannot return, and to make sure that we can help with these stabilization efforts so people can return to their homes. Final point on Syria is in the southwest. It's number 5. I point to that because this is the southwest. It's a de-escalation zone that we negotiated with Jordan and with Russia earlier this year. I think I described it as a painstaking negotiation over many months. That was very true. And it was finalized on July 7th in a meeting between President Trump and President Putin. I think it's not without problems, but it has been one of the most successful ceasefires to date. I think we've saved a significant number of lives, returning Syrians to their homes. We're monitoring the ceasefire every day in Amman. About 1,000 Syrians are now returning every month, according to UN data from Jordan. First time we've seen that trend. That's something positive. We want to keep it moving. And about 1,000 every week displaced from Syria returning to their homes in this area. So total about 5,000 a month. We worked to kind of strengthen the ceasefire earlier this year, or just last month, when we finalized what's called a Memorandum of Principles. Greater definition to the ceasefire. Key principle, the existing arrangements in these areas can remain in place, so opposition structures remain in place pending a long-term political settlement to the civil war through the Geneva process. And also a commitment, very importantly, to remove foreign forces from sensitive areas of this zone. And what that means are Iranian-backed forces, Iranian-backed militias should not be in this area. That's something that the Russians have signed on to. And also, we need to remove foreign jihadi-like presence from this area. And there remains a persistent ISIS cell, which is the red blotch just on the corner of the map. And President Trump and President Putin in Da Nang issued a very important joint statement, which memorialized that memorandum of principles in the Southwest and also the steps going forward on the political process. Let me jump quickly to Iraq. I'll go very quickly. Mosul. When we came in January, East Mosul was liberated on January 26th. The Battle of West Mosul had not even begun, and we knew that would be an enormously daunting task. We have trained a total of 123,000 members of the Iraqi security forces. The Battle of Mosul, the cooperation between the Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga was something that was historic, something we still want to build upon, even as there's tension between Baghdad and Erbil, and something that carried over into the Battle of West Mosul. Battle of West Mosul began on February 19th and concluded on July 10th. It really consumed the first half of this year. It was the main focus of Secretary Tillerson's gathering so many members of our coalition here in March, where we raised about $2.2 billion, and a lot of that money went immediately into the campaign of Mosul. What's remarkable about the Mosul campaign is that of a million displaced from Mosul, the worst case scenario that we had planned for, nearly every single Moslawi that was displaced received humanitarian assistance and aid. So even with 1 million displaced, we did not have a massive humanitarian crisis because of the planning that went into this, and that meeting in March was quite significant. In Mosul today, we have about 500 stabilization projects are ongoing, and we are still working very closely with our coalition to make sure that we have adequate resources for that. Finally, on the map, I want to just talk about two developments. Here on the bottom, this is the Arar border crossing with Saudi Arabia. I point to the border crossing, but what's really significant there is that President Trump and the Secretary, very early on, within the first weeks, identified an opportunity to really reformalize an opening of ties between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. The Secretary had an important conversation with Foreign Minister Jubeir. Foreign Minister Jubeir visited Baghdad on February 25th, the first visit of a Saudi foreign minister in 30 years. And from there, chipping away, we really opened up this relationship. Speaking personally, I've worked in 3 administrations. I remember President Bush going a number of times directly to King Abdullah to really encourage this. The argument being that we want to re-anchor Iraq in the Arab world, diversify its regional relationships. Very important, something the Iraqis want. We think it's in our national security interest. And finally, this broke open. I visited that border crossing in August when it opened, and it was quite a remarkable scene. And then on October 22nd, Secretary Tillerson met in Riyadh with King Salman and Prime Minister Abadi to formally launch the Iraqi-Saudi Coordinating Committee. We now have, for the first time in 30 years, direct flights moving between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, 2 border openings, and this continues to move forward. So that was a real significant breakthrough that we saw this year. I just point finally to the other border crossing, the Tribbil border crossing with Jordan. That's a multi-billion-dollar-a-year commerce route, and we've also worked very hard to open that because our ally Jordan is really first and foremost in our minds when we manage this very difficult situation. Looking forward a little bit into next year, Kuwait will host two very important conferences in February. One together with the World Bank and the EU on a reconstruction event for Iraq to help reconstruct some of these areas. And secondly, our coalition will gather, similar to the event we had here in March in Kuwait in the February timeframe. Finally, when it comes to ISIS, we're not just focused on the physical space of the caliphate, although that was the calling card. It was what held the organization together. We are also, as you know, talked about this a number of times from this podium, foreign fighters, counter-finance, counter-messaging is a constant 24/7 effort from here. On foreign fighters, it really an incredible effort, global effort from all members of our coalition, and working with one of our newest members of the coalition, Interpol. We now have from 60 countries about 40,000 names in a database of known ISIS-affiliated fighters who have tried to travel or did travel to Iraq and Syria. And the UN Security Council today, we believe, will pass a very important resolution, really strengthening the resolution 2178 that passed a few years ago. And our colleagues here, Nathan Sales and the CT Bureau, are doing a terrific job on that. So we hope to have more news on that later in the day. Counter-finance, we've completely decimated ISIS finances by targeting their oil and gas reserves, and they really have no ability to raise significant revenue from what used to be their state-like holdings in Iraq and Syria. But they do still find ways to move money around, and Segal Mendelker and our colleagues at the Treasury Department working constantly to identify these networks, sanction them, and root them out. And counter-messaging, just a remarkable improvement from what we used to see. And I give the private sector here tremendous credit, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Very difficult to start a Twitter account now with an ISIS-affiliated message. You're taken down really almost instantaneously. Almost a million accounts have been taken down. And we're working closely in the region with Saudi Arabia, UAE, all of our partners, and in East Asia with Malaysia and others to counter ISIS's ideology. So ISIS will be around for a while. So we have a long way to go, but we did make some progress this year, and I wanted to kind of bring you into it a little bit, decisions we made early and then how they played out. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions.
I'm just curious. It sounds to me, well, it doesn't just sound to me, you said it, that changes from the policy of the previous administration are responsible for this success. You were in charge of implementing the policy of the previous administration. Why was it doomed to fail? And why did the previous administration continue to do what it was doing when you mentioned these 3 or 4 changes to it that seem to have brought success?
Yeah, thanks, man. I think I'd answer it this way. I think it's not a political statement. It's the fact that we had to do a lot to get the foundation for our campaign set. A transition in wartime from one party to another, you look historically, it can always be a difficult endeavor. I actually give great credit. I think an untold story. The transition actually on these issues was very smooth. The transition team here at State did a great job, and we met regularly with the transition team and said, look, there's about 3 or 4 key decisions that if they're made early, and we did say at the time, we think we can actually defeat the physical caliphate. We actually moved faster than we thought, but 3 or 4 key decisions. Some of them were decisions that the former administration didn't want to take at the end of their time in office, so passed forward. But I will just say it takes focus and attention and prioritization from the top, and that's what we got on day one from the president and when the secretary came in and from Secretary Mattis. And those decisions were made. The delegations made a difference. The decision on Raqqa, we relooked at we looked at all options, and the decision the president made in May was quite significant. And
the previous administration, there wasn't that involvement, that it wasn't that big a priority for the senior members of the last administration?
That's certainly not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that decisions that were made early in the new administration to accelerate the campaign, these are big decisions. It's not something you just go in and make. But they were made early, and they had a major impact. And I think it speaks for itself.
Thanks.
Brett, could you I just have a couple of numerical questions and then one sort of bigger question. The first is, do you have a current tally for the number of civilian deaths as a result of coalition airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq and Syria?
So as you know, we study this quite carefully. I'd really defer you to our CJTF colleagues who study this quite carefully. I can't give you a number here. But let me give you an example on Raqqa. So I've read some reports that, in Raqqa, at the end of the day, like thousands of ISIS fighters escaped. So I was just in Raqqa, and here's what ISIS was doing in the final days of that battle. Down to about 2 neighborhoods, probably about 300 ISIS fighters left. Whenever they would go outside to move from one fighting position for another, they would take a child with them or a bunch of civilians with them, basically using them as human shields. That's how they fought in Mosul. That's how they fought in Raqqa. That's how they fought in Al-Qaim. That's how they fought throughout the campaign. So this is extremely, extremely difficult. Our Syrian partner forces and Iraqi forces, and particularly the Iraqis, took a number of casualties, and Iraqi soldiers died because, in Mosul in particular, the humanitarian priority was put at the top of the campaign plan. So a number of times we did not do an airstrike, did not do certain military activities because of the risk to civilians. In Raqqa, these 2 neighborhoods, saturated with remaining civilians and a limited number of ISIS fighters, so when local tribes from the area came and said, we have to actually evacuate all of these civilians. And so that local deal was made. We think about 4,000 civilians, and we track this extremely closely, and a very small number of foreign fighters, about 300 total ISIS fighters. But the truth of the matter, these guys are using, they came to Syria and Iraq, and they purport to be representing the Sunni population, and they use the Sunni population as human shields. So I'm sorry I can't give you a specific figure, but I just want to I've been in some of the centers, particularly in Syria. I was in one during the Raqqa battle, of how these decisions are being made. And it is extremely difficult when you confront an enemy like this.
Just two quick follow-ups. One is, you talked about geographically reducing ISIS control. Do you have numbers of fighters who remain, who were able to flee? And then second, the Pentagon today accused Russia of intentionally violating the deconfliction agreements with the U.S., particularly with air forces. Do you have any comment on that?
So on deconfliction, I have to defer to DoD. There was an incident on December 13th that, again, whether it was accidental, whether it was intentional, don't know. There have been direct, very high-level senior engagements between our military colleagues and theirs, and we have not had a significant incident like that since. So the deconfliction line overall has held. We had some incident in June. In June we shot down a Syrian plane just south of Topka when they crossed the line that we had agreed upon. So this is serious. This is really, really serious business. But for the most part, the deconfliction lines have held. In terms of overall fighters, we think there's about, I hate to put numbers on it, but in some of these areas where they still are, about 3,000 or so. That's kind of our assessment. In terms of an exodus of ISIS fighters from Syria and Iraq, it's our best estimate, and all we can do is give our best estimate from our intelligence community and everything, that there has not been a significant exodus of foreign fighters from Iraq. I hate to, I have it in my head, I just hate to even say. So I defer to some of my colleagues on that.
Hi, thanks very much for doing this. Beyond the red areas marked on that map, there are lots of other areas in the world, Libya, West Africa, the Philippines, Afghanistan, where groups that have raised the ISIS banner have sprung up. Are these groups in tight communication? Is it a movement? Is that command and control, or is this just an inspirational kind of branding exercise from local insurgents? And will the campaign continue until you've rid of the whole world of people with the ISIS flag?
So, look, it's a great question, and it used to be a very well-connected organization, being run out of Raqqa, with direct communication to Boko Haram, which then part of it split and became ISIS in Nigeria, direct communication to Libya, direct communication to Sinai, direct communication to Afghanistan. We've pretty much severed a lot of that, particularly from Syria. But, look, ISIS became a brand, and a lot of pre-existing terrorist groups, you've seen this in the Sinai, for example, and start to raise the flag of ISIS, mainly to recruit foreign fighters and other things. But make no doubt, the Defeat ISIS strategic plan that I mentioned is not an Iraq-Syria plan, it's a global campaign plan. So we use different tools in different parts of the world, but certainly in Mindanao and in Philippines, when they popped up and tried to establish themselves, we worked very closely with with Australia, with members of the coalition, with the Philippine Armed Forces to root them out. So this is going to go on for some time. And the main priority, number one, is protecting our homeland. But second, make sure that they cannot have sanctuary to recruit and attract foreign fighters.
Just to on that, the Russians are saying that ISIS is defeated in Syria. You're saying there's still some 3,000 or so there. Does that reflect different understanding of the intelligence, or is that a political thing? They want to have an excuse to kick you out of Syria now. Job's done. Leave us and Assad alone.
Well, as I said, look, we're advancing our own national security interests in Syria. We're going to stay in Syria to make sure there's an enduring defeat of ISIS, to make sure we can stabilize these areas. That's very clear. No, ISIS is not totally defeated in Syria. As I mentioned, I think I gave you the number of airstrikes we've done the last week alone. So that's very clear. And another key statistic, every coalition enabled, meaning our coalition, enabled operation against ISIS. ISIS has never been able to come back and reclaim a territory that we helped liberate. Frankly, the Russians can't say that. You know, in Palmyra, they did the kind of concert that got a lot of attention. Then ISIS actually came back and retook Palmyra. We're having some problems on the south side of the river in which Syrian armed forces claim to have liberated these areas, and we see ISIS trying to come back. It's not happening in the areas that we helped liberate, because we're doing a lot of extensive planning for what comes afterwards. So bottom line, answer your question. No, ISIS is not totally finished in Syria. We still have a lot of work to do.
Next response, please.
This is somewhat related, but do you see indications that the Russians are now eager to get out of Syria? And do you think, and maybe this is premature, but if so, do you think that could fast track the Geneva process?
So we have agreed with the Russians that the only way to bring an end to this conflict is through Geneva, through 2254. We've also made clear, as a coalition, that there will be no international reconstruction assistance for regime-controlled areas of Syria absent that political process really moving ahead in a credible way that can ultimately lead to a political transition. We also happen to believe that the endpoint of that political process, which is UN-sponsored parliamentary and presidential elections, in which all Syrians vote, that means the entire diaspora votes. The 5 million people who are displaced from Syria can vote. And the Russians have now signed up to that. We believe that if you get to that point, and that'll take some time, that Bashar al-Assad will no longer be in power in Damascus. The Russians might have a different view. I've seen the announcement that ISIS is wrapped up and they're going to withdraw from Syria, but that really remains to be seen. I think they'll retain a fairly significant presence. And again, we will engage with them where our interests align. We will make very clear to them where our interests don't align. So when it comes to Syria, you have to have some engagement with the Russians. There's a military-to-military deconfliction channel, and on the diplomatic side, we're engaged with them regularly.
Just a couple more questions. Carly from CS. Thanks.
I'm curious about the relationship between the U.S. and the YPG, because, you know, obviously that's a major sticking point here. And I think a few weeks ago, Jonathan Cohen said that the relationship was temporary and tactical. We've seen Trump tell Erdogan that there are going to be adjustments made to that relationship. So can you give us, shine some light as to what those adjustments are going to be going forward?
So after the Battle of Raqqa, Raqqa, again, such an intense urban assault. That's why it required a presidential decision, because we had to give some equipment, and it's limited, extremely limited, all of which was very transparent to our NATO ally Turkey. But that decision had to be made if we were going to do Raqqa, and it was. Now that that major phase of operations is over, there will be adjustments in the level of military support. We will continue to remain in Syria and to work with local hold forces. The Raqqa Internal Security Force is a force that we're training to make sure that we can hold the ground, and continue to work with the Syrian Democratic Forces. But as the years goes on, there will be adjustments to the type of support, just given the way the campaign is proceeding. I think that's very natural. That was always part of the plan. That was what we briefed to the Turks before Raqqa, and that's what we've told them now. So that'll kind of continue throughout the year. But as we remain in Syria, we'll continue to work with local actors. We want local people to be in charge of their areas, and we will retain our policy of full transparency with Turkey.
And
I was wondering if you could give your thoughts on the peace process Russia's attempting to open up in Sochi. How will that impact the negotiations in Geneva? Is there any conditions in which the U.S. would support those talks?
So it kind of remains to be seen. We've heard Sochi was going to happen last month, and it was going to happen this month. Now it might happen in January. Now it might happen in February. We've engaged with the Russians on this about exactly what they have in mind. And they have said that Sochi would be kind of a gathering of Syrian figures. And then what happens in Sochi would feed directly into Geneva. If that's the case, that's something that might actually support the Geneva process. What we would not support and what would have absolutely no legitimacy would be a parallel process as parallel entirely to Geneva. Geneva is the locus of where the political settlement has to be struck. That's not only U.S. policy, that's now something the Russians have very clearly signed up to in the denying statement. So I would just have to say it really remains to be seen. We also have, I have to say, some real skepticism of anything in which the Iranians are a guarantor of a process. So the Astana process, for example, in which the Iranians play a guarantor role for de-escalation zones. One reason we've not participated in Astana, we observe, is because that to us just kind of lacks credibility. So we'll continue to remain engaged with the Russians, and we want to settle the Syrian civil war through a constitutional reform process leading to UN-supervised elections in Geneva. And that is the key to unlocking reconstruction assistance in Syria writ large. So we've been very consistent with the Russians on this. In denying, they signed up to the overall roadmap, and so we'll have to see. This will be a key focus here over the coming year. Final point, just to sum up, when we looked at the situation in January, it was hard to see how you could have a really credible political process until you remove the physical caliphate and you bring the overall levels of violence down. And that's why over 2017 we were so focused on defeating the caliphate and de-escalating the overall civil war. And that sets the conditions now for a more meaningful political process in Geneva. Staffan de Mistura was just here yesterday. We met with him about the next steps, and this will be a very intense focus of ours over the course of the next year. So we look forward to briefing you on that. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Bye, ladies. I just want to mention one more thing, back to the initial line of questioning that you had about the UN vote that just took place. And I just wanted to reiterate what the president had said yesterday, and that was the UN vote is really not the only factor that the administration would take into consideration in dealing with our foreign relations and countries who have chosen to vote one way or the other. So I just want to make that clear. In addition, I just received a note from our folks over at the White House and the NSC, and they tell me that the president's foreign policy team has been empowered to explore various options going forward with other nations. However, no decisions have been made. Okay.
Since you opened this up to the line of questioning or responding
No,
to
I just wanted to be
no, I understand.
To follow
So,
up on that because we had some new information to provide
right,
you since
yes.
Jess Lenderking was here.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for conveying that. But now that raises another question, and that is Ambassador Haley in her comments this morning said, this vote, we will remember this vote. If you have singled us out, the people who single us out. Well, the vote last month on the Cuba resolution was far more one-sided. You were only two. It was 191 to 2. Why do you have why is this vote, which was 128 to at least you had more than one other country with you, and you had a significant number of abstentions. Why is this more important than a vote in which you're literally all alone but one?
But I think I would say this would be something that would be handled out of US-UN and not handled out of this building. So if you have any subsequent questions about that, I can certainly refer you to Nikki Haley's staff on that.
Please do. Can you relay the question? I mean, I want to know, why is this vote more important than the other vote, which was worse, which was more lopsided and not your favor? Why is your memory so long on that? And everyone seems to have forgotten about 191.
I would be happy to take your question and convey it to her staff on that.
Thank
You also just on maybe you'll give the same answer, but on the Haley remarks, she didn't only say individual countries, but the U.S. would remember this when it determines its contributions to the UN. So is that a process that's already starting where you're
Not,
looking
not
at
that I
levels?
am aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I'm not going to speak on behalf of Ambassador Haley or her staff, but I'm not aware of any of that taking place right
Can
now.
I ask then that you speak on behalf of the administration? And does Ambassador Haley speak on behalf of the administration? I don't understand why there's two parallel streams of
Well, there are some things that when it
discussion.
comes to votes that take place at the United Nations, we're not involved in that process down here. So that is why I say,
I would hope that you are.
well, that is
I
why
mean,
I would
it's
say
supposed
I'd
to be-
refer you to her office.
Yeah, but
and
her
they
office
can
is
help you
supposed to
with
be
that.
informed by this building. Is she running her own show up
No,
there?
I'm just not going to comment on some of those things. Okay. Okay. Great to see you all.
Take a question for answer next year.
For next year, you want me to hold it for a week and a half?
I'll give you the question now. So
Certainly.
the question is that I have received this detailed, reports about the people in Pakistan. They are changing the religion to Christianity to get here and apply for the asylum. So are you aware of it? Are you doing something about it? And
I'm not aware of that, but I'd be happy to take your question, see if we can get an answer for you, okay? All right, thanks, everybody. We'll see you this afternoon, right? Okay. Later this afternoon, in a few hours. Looking forward to that.
Early.
Right?